What is the most money a person could get over the course of his life? If you think the number is less than $100 trillion, you'll be surprised. Today, we're going to talk about the richest people who have ever lived. Even though most of them have been gone for hundreds of years, we can still see that they lived in a type of luxury even by today's standards. William the Conqueror. People often say that the English royal family is one of the richest families in the world. With $88 billion, they won't be sleeping under a bridge anytime soon, but their wealth is nothing compared to that of their ancestor. William the Conqueror was the first king of England. He took power on the British island when he was 38, and he made a lot of money quickly, which today would be worth $228 billion. About a third of them were just taxes that he got from Normandy's farmers. So either they were very wealthy peasants, or they were taxed so much that they became poor. Which one do you think is more likely? The rest of his wealth came, of course, from the British territory of Concord. Local barons who wanted to keep their land and heads had to swear an oath to the new king and pay huge taxes, which William thought were way too small to share. So, with $228 billion, he decided it was time to start living. Most of what he spent went toward building things. Before he died, he was in charge of more than 100 buildings such as castles, forts, churches, and the famous White Tower. They were decorated with tapestries that were very detailed. Gold was his favorite color, for sure. And at the time, it was easier to just make everything gold than to paint it. So there were seas of gold and silver in William's kingdom. Osman Ali Khan. Being the richest Indian ever should say a lot about the person. People in the Asian country live in houses that are 27 stories tall, but they can't even come close to Osman Ali Khan. He was the city's last ruler. Ali Khan ran the princely state from 1911 until 1948 when India took over the country. When your leader is known as the richest man on earth, even though he lived during the same time as JP Morgan, Rockefeller, Rothschilds, and other well-known tycoons, it's a miracle that your country has stayed independent for so long. Even more so when it was the only place in the world with a working diamond mine at the time. Being in charge of a country's mint was the only place where diamonds could be made. The very least he could do is save up to $230 billion. Well, if he hadn't used the money he made to improve the lives of his people. Even though he gave his country electricity, railroads, roads, and an airport, the ruler was able to get himself some very expensive things, like $100 million worth of gold and silver, over $500 million worth of jewels, and the 50 million Jacob diamond, which is one of the largest diamonds in the world. The Nizam gave Queen Elizabeth II diamond jewels, a tiara, and a necklace for her wedding. He did this to show off how rich he was. Ali Khan wasn't just the richest man in the world. He also had the biggest balls. He showed off his wealth to the person who had ruled over his country just a few decades earlier. Nicholas Romanov. Not everyone can say that they gave the world communism. Even though no one in their right mind would have done it, Nicholas Romanov, also known as the last Russian emperor, he was such a bad leader that he made Russia the place where the ideology was born that still scares people all over the world. One would think that a man like this couldn't be that rich, but unlike in Russia, Nicholas did pretty well with his money. He had $300 billion in his bank account, even though his subjects were literally grass and dirt. It was easy to see some small social problems. One could be forgiven for wondering how this Tsar could have so much money when its people were so poor. The answer lies in the United States, more specifically, Alaska. Romanov sold the oil-rich peninsula to the United States because he was afraid of losing it to the British. Of course, when he sold it, he didn't know how rich and resourceful the land was. But, well, it's not like he went crazy over... Oh, well, never mind. The Tsar and his family had everything they could want. Even the richest people in the world might be jealous of that. Seeing the beautiful places in St. Petersburg and Moscow is the only way to understand how rich they were. One of these palaces is the Kremlin, where another crazy person who wants power lives today. If the same thing would happen to him, we'll see. John D. Rockefeller. The fact that John D. Rockefeller has been called the most productive person who has ever lived shows how he became the richest person in the world. In the middle of the 20th century, Rockefeller is thought to have made over $1.5 trillion over the course of his life. At the end of his life, he was worth about $400 billion. How could it be any other way? At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, he controlled 90% of the US oil market with his Standard Oil. Rockefeller, unlike the billionaires of today, knew how to spend his money, not just raise them. One of the first big things he bought was himself. He paid money so that he wouldn't have to fight in the American Civil War. This probably saved his life. In his later years, he thought about paying Winston Churchill to write his life story. Well, that didn't happen, but the idea was great. One of John's biggest expenses, though, was building all the family memorials, which are now cultural landmarks. They are not only great works of architecture, but they are also filled with beautiful paintings by well-known artists. Rockefeller was also one of the first billionaires who liked cars. Back then, it was a big deal to own a car, so Rockefeller was the first one to do so. John also owned one of the first cars ever made. He didn't mean to, but now everyone with 10 figures in their bank account is expected to have a garage full of very expensive cars. So Rockefeller leaving this world wasn't all good. Mansa Musa. Being wealthy and from Marley sounds like the start of a very bad joke right now. But in the 1400s, the rules were a little different. Back then, colonialism hadn't killed off most of the people in resource-rich Marley, and its Emperor Musa I was thought to be the richest person on Earth, with a net worth of about $415 billion in today's money, of course. In 1312, when Mansa Musa took power, Europe was one of the worst places to live in because of famine and many different diseases. The Black Death was coming and would soon wipe out everyone on the continent. That gave some African kingdoms the chance to grow and get stronger, and Marley was at the very top. Once Musa was in charge, he took over the city of Timbuktu, which at the time was the most important trade city in Africa. It was like Constantinople. Musa quickly became the richest person on earth because of the money he made from his conquests. In 1324, he went to Mecca with a caravan that stretched as far as the eye could see to show off how rich he was. Musa knew how to travel on a budget. He carried tons of gold, had thousands of camels and horses, and traveled with tens of thousands of people. Everywhere he stopped, he built mosques so he could pray to Allah in the right way. I guess he had a reason to thank his God for something. Everywhere Musa went, the economy was in shambles because he spent money on useless things, which caused inflation to rise so quickly that local economies couldn't keep up and just fell apart. Let's say you conquer a country in style. You make the people there so wealthy that the economy can't support them anymore. The US can learn from what Musa did. King Solomon. When compared to this Jewish king, the people who came before him could be called hobos. The Bible says that King Solomon was the richest king in the world. The Old Testament says that King Solomon got about 25 tons of gold every year for 39 years straight. That's enough to build a palace out of gold bricks without having to give any of them away. Experts think that Solomon's wealth during his rule, which included his tribute, taxes, and other income, would be about $2.2 trillion in today's money. Because the information is what it is, of course. We can't think that the king will spend his money on drugs, alcohol, and women. Instead, the Bible said that everything he spent money on was good, and that he even built the first Jewish temple in Jerusalem. I'll let you decide whether the Bible's idea or mine is more likely to be true. Augustus Caesar. Choosing for yourself the first emperor of the biggest country in the world might sound something like Vladimir Putin could do at any time. But he won't be the first person to do something like that. About 2,000 years ago, Augustus Caesar did the same thing. And the simple political move worked out very well for him. Augustus made a lot of money, which in today's money would be worth $4.6 trillion. This almost unimaginable amount of money seems impossible until you realize that Augustus owned Egypt, which fed half of the empire. Yes, Caesar could have had his coffee inside a pyramid or on the head of the Sphinx if he wanted to. Augustus owned a whole country, and it was thought that his uncle Julius had left him at least 10 million gold coins. It is thought that the 10 million gold coins are worth about $200 billion in today's money. So he didn't have a bad start to his life, even though a lot of his money was used to build roads, monuments, and temples. Augustus mixed his personal finances with those of the Roman Empire. A few million were also spent each year on public entertainment, like the emperor's finances, chariot races, gladiator fights, and other sports events. But his army of 250,000 soldiers was probably the most important thing he owned. They helped him plan how to keep the country under his control. So he gave them a lot of money. In today's money, this would have cost Augustus about $250 billion per year. But what can I say? Staying in power, running the biggest country on earth, and making $4.6 trillion is well worth this spare change. Akbar I. If you asked someone what the Mughal Empire was, they might think it was a new virus that would make the whole world lock down again. Yes, the Far Eastern Empire, which once ruled most of the Indian subcontinent and the lands south and west of the Himalayas, didn't have much an effect on Western culture. But its influence was very important in South Asia. It's mostly because of Akbar I, who is said to have ruled over 25% of the world's GDP at one point. This means, of course, that he now has a huge fortune of $21 trillion. Even though it's not as big of a deal, everyone can still see that it's a huge amount of money. If I had $21 trillion, I would definitely live alone and simply. Akbar, on the other hand, had a different plan. Even by today's standards, he lived a very rich and lavish life. Akbar built himself 3 amazing palaces in Delhi, Agar, and Fatehpur. He filled them with so much gold that just looking at them would give Donald Trump a heart attack. Silk marble and a lot of art were also used to decorate the inside. Akbar loved the arts and spent a lot of money on paintings, books, music, and other kinds of art. He even tried to combine Hinduism and Islam to make his own religion. You might think he did this to boost his ego, but it was actually a political move to bring together a country that was violently split over religion. He failed, which was bad for the area, and India would pay dearly for it for many generations. Shenzong. Being the Chinese emperor during one of the richest times in the country's history has had its advantages. China was very prosperous when Shenzong was in charge from 1067 to 1085. Poor farmers got much needed help from new social policies, and the country as a whole was at peace and growing economically. At the time, it is thought that Shenzong controlled over 30% of the world's GDP. Experts say that at the height of his power, the emperor had the same amount of money as $30 trillion. Shenzong lived in palaces that are still important pieces of architecture today. Still, he spent most of his money on making the lives of his people better, and we don't have a lot of information about his own life. Genghis Khan. When talking about the richest person in the history of the world, it's easy to picture a well-educated visionary with access to power, a hardworking personality, and a knack for trade and business growth. Genghis Khan was none of these things though. Even though the Mongol ruler is best known for his brutal wars, which caused destruction, chaos, and massacres as far as Europe, he did make enough money to be worth more than $100 trillion. Given that he killed about 10% of the world's people over the course of 20 years, I wouldn't suggest that you learn anything about business from this ruler. Genghis Khan did, in fact, make the first biological weapon. So that's a way of thinking that's new. Yes, Genghis was able to take over half of the known world because of how he fought. 200 years from now, the bubonic plague will kill about 25% of the world's people, making it the deadliest disease in history. This is how you leave something behind. Even though he was very rich, Genghis Khan, whose name was Temujin and who was born into slavery, shared his wealth with his people. Well, he did have a lot of wives, and from each one, he had many children. God bless him, he had $100 trillion to pay all of his alimony. So it looks like if you want to be one of the richest people in history, all you have to do is rule a country with an iron fist, put your own money into its economy, and treat your neighbors badly. Something about that makes me think of a certain world leader right now. What lessons did you learn about business from the 10 richest people in history? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked and enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Get notified by clicking the bell button below. From the high-end stories of today, this has been Modern Luxury. As always, we look forward to seeing you again in one of our videos. Thanks for watching.